So guys, because the Bulls are off today, and because quite frankly I need a break from this Bulls team after the last 2 games, I thought I would do a different video today and talk about some of the more underrated players in Bulls history that I feel should be recognized for their accomplishments and given credit for what they were able to do for the franchise. Now, usually these videos on the history of the Bulls, they don't do as well, so if you do like the content, feel free to drop a like on it so that it can get out to a wider audience. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Before I get into the video, I just want to do a big shout out to all of my new and old subscribers. I feel like it's been a while since I just took a moment to express my gratitude to you all. I really do appreciate all of the love and support you've shown on this channel since I started it a few months back. I would not have been able to grow the channel without you guys, so much appreciated. And as long as I'm able to, I will continue to put out daily Bulls content. But anyway, let's talk about today's topic, because I think over the course of Chicago Bulls history, there have been a lot of players who were incredibly underrated in terms of what they brought to the court and contributed in the overall success of the team, but obviously they weren't the main stars or even the second and third options for that matter. Guys that did all of the little things or had a strong presence in the locker room. Now, I'm sure there will be guys who I miss on this list, so don't fault me for that. Please do mention any players you think were underrated that I did not mention in the comments below though. Now, I'm also only basing a player's value of being underrated in just their time with the Bulls, so I'm not factoring in their career as a whole when playing with other teams. Now, usually I do these in the form of rankings, but in this one, I'm just going to mention players in no particular order. So first up, one of the most underrated players in franchise history for the Bulls, Taj Gibson. Yeah, I remember when the Bulls drafted Taj Gibson in 2009, I believe it was anyway, and thinking, a 4-year college player who isn't that great on offense, does he really fit this Bulls roster in terms of what they're trying to do with their young core? And that was at the time when they were building around Derrick Rose. But man, Taj fit in so nicely and ended up being a bit of a steal in that draft, given that he was selected late in the first round. I loved Taj's defensive intensity, his energy that he brought to the court. He wasn't the best player on offense, but he actually ended up playing better on that end of the floor, more than I thought he would anyway, coming out of college. He fought hard and grabbed offensive boards. Him and Noah together down low, they were just a nasty combo on defense. You look at Taj's numbers, when he was with the Bulls for those 8 seasons, averaging 9.4 points per game, 6.4 rebounds, and 1.2 blocks. And you don't think, it's not too much there really to talk about, but there were so many things that he did on the court that made those early 2010 years of the Bulls so great. Him coming off the bench. I was sad when the Bulls traded him away, but I also knew at that time when they did trade him, he didn't really fit with the Bulls and what they were trying to do, and he was starting to decline a bit given his age. Taj is actually 10th all-time in of games played for the Bulls as a franchise, and 5th all-time in blocks and 6th all-time in offensive rebounds. Next, gotta show love for my guy Kirk Hinrich. I mean, the guy was never really the most athletic, not a great defender, but he could get hot in a hurry, especially shooting from 3. And that was before really shooting the 3 ball was a main focus in the NBA. With Hinrich too, he was also another one of those guys that did a lot of little things on the court, especially for the 2010 Bulls and leading to their success. Being a spark off the bench, a great playmaker and facilitator, Kirk is 3rd all-time in games played on the Bulls behind Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. He is also the Bulls' all-time leader in 3-pointers, 3rd in assists and steals, again only behind MJ and Pippen, and 8th all-time in scoring. And I know I'm going through these a little quickly, but I want to make sure that I get to all the players that I had in mind. Another, how about Luol Deng? Now, I know Deng was a 2-time All-Star, so you're probably thinking, how could he be underrated when he was named an All-Star? Likely the Bulls' 3rd option on the 2010 Bulls, and maybe even the 2nd option when Rose ended up getting injured. But I do think Deng wasn't given enough credit for his effort and ability as a two-way player, because we remember Deng being a great defensive player. He even made the all-defensive team in the 2011-2012 season. But he was also a solid player on offense, not an elite offensive player, but he was a good enough player on that end, in my view, to be one of the Bulls' best two-way players in franchise history. During his 10 seasons with the Bulls, Bulls, he averaged 16.1 points per game, 6.4 rebounds per game, and 2.5 assists. He was an efficient shooter, shooting 46% during his time with the Bulls. For a guy that shot a lot of mid-range jumpers, that's actually pretty decent. And there was a reason Tom Thibodeau always played him so much when he was averaging a league-leading 39.4 minutes per game. Leave it to Tom Thibodeau to have one guy play that much in a season. Next, how about Toni Kukoc? Now, you might think, Kukoc is necessarily not, underrated, and some would consider him to be one of the best Bulls players of all time, and even to this day, he's still remembered to be a great piece in that Bulls 90s dynasty. He came into the league when he was 25, and this at the time when MJ had actually retired to go play baseball, and he was already very much NBA ready. I mean, he was likely the Bulls' second or third option on some of those nights when MJ was in retirement. During his 7 seasons with the Bulls, he averaged 14.1 points per game, 5 rebounds, and 1.1 steals. He was another one of these great two-way players for the Bulls, and although his numbers by today's standards in terms of shooting from 3 weren't that great, he was actually a decent 3-point shooter for that time period in the 90s. Sticking with that area, how about Ron Harper? The Bulls' starting point guard for that second three-peat. I mean, he was really the glue that kept that engine running in those years. He was great at facilitating and running the offense through Michael. He was an incredible defender, and I think when you think of the 90s, you mainly think about Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Dennis Rodman, or Horace Grant in the early 90s. But Ron Harper was a huge piece in running that triangle offense for that team in the late 90s. I would also add BJ Armstrong to this list, at least in the early 90s. I know BJ was a one-time All-Star with the Bulls, but he was a great point guard for them in those initial years when the Bulls won their first championships. He wasn't necessarily the best facilitator, he was an okay passer, but his offensive effort and his ability to shoot the three very efficiently, especially for that time period, were very key in the Bulls in those early years. He actually led the league in three-point shooting percentage one season, and believe it or not, his three-point shooting percentage in his time with the Bulls was 44%, which is actually incredible for that time period. Of course, he wasn't putting up that many attempts as you would maybe see today, but shooting at that rate from 3 when it wasn't commonplace is definitely noteworthy. I'll also add Steve Kerr into the mix from those 90s years. Now, Steve wasn't a great player by any means, but there was one thing he was very good at. It was being a clutch player who knew how to knock down big shots. It was no surprise that despite Kerr's lack of athleticism, ball handling, and defense, that he was more often than not one of those players in the game in the closing minutes, and that's because at that time he was one of the best shooters in the league. He hit the game-winning shot in the 1997 NBA Finals, came up with some big steals in late game situations in the playoffs, and what I liked about Kerr was the fact that he was very tough mentally, and he played hard 100% of the time, despite the fact that he was undersized, not athletic, and really shouldn't have probably been in the NBA. He was drafted 50th overall in the second round and turned out to be a key contributing piece to those late 90s Bulls. And it was really quite the story to see, the success that Steve Kerr had over the course of his career, also being a player that was a walk-on in college. Now, fast forward a bit to today, I would throw in guys like Thaddeus Young. I wouldn't have said that last season at all, but based on his play this season, you could argue he's been the Bulls' second most important player, even their second best player, just purely based on all of the things he does on both ends of the floor, playing multiple positions, getting offensive rebounds, blocking shots, getting steals. He's one of the Bulls' better playmakers as well. It's no wonder he's been rumored in so many trade talks, because he's incredibly valuable and is shown to be a very versatile player this late in his career. The next one, I'm sure some of you are going to see as a bit of a random one, but how about David Nwaba? I seriously loved this guy in his one season with the Bulls. I think Stacey King said it best whenever Nwaba was on the court. He would always say, it's like there's 5 David Nwabas out there, and that always felt like it was the case, because he was just everywhere on the court, hustling on defense, fighting for 50-50 balls, drawing offensive fouls. He just reminded me very similar to like a Dennis Rodman, obviously nowhere near as good as Rodman, but he just did so many small things, and I was sad when the Bulls didn't extend him and he ultimately went and played for the Cavs the following season after his time with the Bulls. Another random player that kind of comes to mind who was a great defender was Ronnie Brewer in that early 2010 years. He was part of the Bulls bench mob. I didn't know this, but Brewer to this day still leads the entire franchise in defensive box plus minus ahead of guys like Ben Wallace, Michael Jordan, and Joakim Noah. I just thought that that was interesting. I always enjoyed watching the guy play and his hustle and hard-nosed defense in those years. Another guy I was disappointed the Bulls didn't hold on to. Anyway, I've listed quite a few players here. I'm sure there were a number of guys I forgot, so please mention them in the comments if I did. Let's get our underrated Bulls players some love. You could also argue that guys like Scottie Pippen and Joakim Noah should be thrown into the mix because, you know, they were such big pieces in their respective teams, but maybe didn't always get the credit they deserve because they were playing alongside superstars and Michael Jordan and Derrick Rose. But I didn't include them in this list just because they were multi-all-stars and all-NBA players, so I'm not sure that they can really be classified as underrated, but I do think they likely didn't get as much credit for their contributions and efforts during their tenure with the Bulls. That's all I've got for today though, guys. The Bulls will be taking on the Raptors tomorrow. I'll have a live group chat for the game, so check that out if you're interested. As always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan and you enjoy daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.